So we are on our last panel of the day. The panel is on the digital sports economy, media, betting, and commercial strategy. So we're going to actually pick up on some of the strands that we heard about in the keynote in this panel. So let me introduce the two panelists, and then Gervil will come up here and moderate. So let's start with panelist Batul Iransi, who is the Senior Director of Business and Legal Affairs at Fox Sports, where she advises on major sports media rights and production operations, including coverage of the FIFA World Cup, the UEFA competitions, the NFL, MLB, NCAA athletics. A dual qualified attorney in California and Istanbul, she has more than 15 years of experience in sports, media, and entertainment across the US, Europe, Latin America, Africa, Oceania. She is a Fulbright scholar, published author, and PhD candidate at UC Berkeley Law, researching revenue and compensation in the digital streaming era. And then our second panelist is Rick Trashok, is a senior counsel in the gaming and administrative law practice at McDonald's Carano. He serves as the chairman of compliance and governance committees for the global gaming companies and has an extensive career obtaining gaming licenses in Nevada and other jurisdictions, as well as representing gaming industry clients before the Nevada Gaming Commission. For all of his career, he has also been a teacher. Personally, I've taken his class, and I can say he is a fantastic teacher and a great mentor for students. And finally, he currently serves as the executive director of the new Center for Constitutional Law at the University of Nevada, and I heard about this, and it's a great new program, so you should ask about it after the conference. So let me introduce Gurveer here, who will then moderate the panel.
I'm sure you guys are tired of hearing from me by now, but I'm going to moderate this last panel here. So we got a lot of questions from the student body, and I'm really excited about this panel, so thanks again for speaking with us today. I first want to ask, how did each of you first become involved in the sports media and commercial side of the industry?
Professor. How did I become involved in the sports media side of the industry? Other than teaching gaming law here at Berkeley and having represented big operators both in Europe and the United States in the online gambling and in the sports betting industries, I am sitting as chairman of the compliance committees for a lot of these big companies. That's how I got into and understand the regulatory and the legal requirements, the statutory requirements governing the gaming industry. As a Division I runner a century ago at a University of Nevada, and my father, who was the head football coach and athletic director, it was sort of in my blood to the sports side of it, but that's indirectly how I got involved in it.
Wow. This is a tough act to follow. I'm cheating, right? I'm from Istanbul, and in both sides of my family, there's not a single lawyer, there's not a single athlete. So I started playing volleyball, and all my teammates, friends, they became Olympians. And I'm barely 5'2", so I had to make a choice. I decided sports is not going to work out for me, probably, but I wanted to stay in. So more than a decade ago, more than 15 years ago, one of my really great volleyball coaches told me something really valuable. If you ask, you'll get an answer. If you knock on doors, someone will open. And I actually took it literally. I knocked on the Secretary General's door at Turkish Volleyball Federation, and that's how I become involved in sports industry as a legal intern at Turkish Volleyball Federation, then followed by Turkish Basketball Federation. At the time, 2010 FIBA men's basketball tournament, the World Cup, was happening in 5 cities in Turkey. So I got involved in that on the ticketing side, media side, legal side, operations side, which is basically my job today. It's touching on all those aspects. So I guess 15 years later, almost 20 years later, it still works for me. I knock on doors and I volunteer for the opportunities, and it turns out people do like that kind of approach, and people do need that kind of help. One other thing is being easy to work with or being kind is underrated. If you have both, I think that's how I got involved and how I stayed in.
So I think we can call it destiny, right, for both of you guys?
Sure.
Sure. So we talked a lot about, in a couple of the other panels, about how things have changed in the last decade. How would you say the rapid growth of like digital platforms has changed the economics of both sports media and how you manage the fans?
Okay, I'll go first. So when I first started 15 years ago at a law firm as a transactional attorney, representing some of the companies you know and watch, I remember the contracts very neat in the exclusivity. In any and all platforms throughout the universe during the term. Now I see it's a slice for the social media, it's a slice with carve-outs, it's a slice with monetization. It's not that neat anymore. There are blackouts, there are, really extensive strategies around exclusivity. We heard Rich Brand talk earlier about it's all about money. It is all about money, but it's also all about exclusivity now. Which portion do you own? And I think with money and visibility, the eyeballs on social media, we see more and more involvement and less exclusivity in any platform. You no longer see people sitting for hours only focusing on linear. Again, we heard it from the earlier panelists. Sometimes when you're watching a game on linear, you're also following social media in real time, how people are commentating on a call, on a even the position. So that draws attention, and I can tell the way we consume sports as consumer has changed. The way our attention is divided has changed, and naturally, how those rights are being monetized and how those sporting events are covered also have changed.
I have a different take on this because I don't understand social media and I'm not a sports fan. But my take on this is what's happened with the technology when we first started seeing internet casino gaming about 20 years ago as it started to come online. And then we had with the Murphy decision where the U.S. Supreme Court said that it's up to the states, which is an interesting question today when you look at the prediction markets. But when you look at the states, they're the ones that historically and traditionally have been responsible for sports betting, and that the Congress does not have the ability to order the states on how they're going to regulate gambling. So in that decision in 2018, what happened was everything exploded. And the one common theme that I've heard today is follow the money. And it's all about money. So after the Murphy decision, two things happened. You had these companies who had been involved one way or another in internet gaming, and they saw a huge opportunity with sports betting because it targets a completely different market. And the older crowd that would go to land-based casinos and gamble, that demographic is dying off, but we have this whole generation coming up, and the way they're going to gamble is through sports betting. And so I think that was the most important aspect of it. On this other side of it, you had the states who were looking at the amount bet, we call that the handle, in sports betting. and they all they saw were dollar signs, and so they see these huge numbers, the amount being bet, and thinking, well, let us legalize that. This is sort of clean. We don't have to worry about casinos or any of that. Let's just legalize this internet sports betting, and we are going to solve all of our revenue problems. What that piece of the puzzle ignored is that the margins in sports betting are razor thin, and the amount of tax revenue that can be generated from sports betting is razor thin. And for the companies that are offering these platforms, because the volumes are so large, they're just tremendous. Even 0.25% means a ton of money. And so those two things together have driven the gambling and the sports gambling market. And the last thing that is being played out right now, in fact, my firm's arguing this in the Ninth Circuit, has to do with the prediction markets, but I'll leave that for a later question.
So my next question was going to be what you thought was going to play the biggest role in the digital sports economy, but I think we can guess what each person's answers would be. So my next question is instead going to be what you think can be done to best approach monetizing the fan engagement across digital platforms.
We want it to be organic, right? Because we're all fans, first of all, and we're consuming this, content as the consumer. How many times did you get frustrated going into a website, trying to read the article, but really trying to get to that article because there are so many ads around it, and most of the times they're not even relevant. It is frustrating. Now imagine that popping up all over your screen, whether it's on your phone or your tablet or linear television. It is frustrating. On the other hand, ads are important and a very good revenue stream for the broadcasters and producers who are actually paying billions of dollars to be able to bring that content to the consumer. So that there needs to be a balance, but there needs to be an organic and not so frustrating balance so that we don't actually lose what's important here. Fox, any other broadcaster, we are storytellers. Me, all of us, we're consumers. So how do we tell a story from the producer broadcaster side to the audience, to the consumer, that's gonna make a lasting relationship so that the consumer keep coming back to consume that product, that production. It's important for the rights holder as well. It's important for the players as well. Imagine the delivery of a sporting event is so organic, everybody wins. Then you have a connection with your audience, the audience stay engaged, drives the sports properties media rights price up. That trickles down to the players, that trickles down to the venues, that trickles down to everybody in the ecosystem. How do we get there? It's a really tricky balance, and a balance that I don't have to think day to day, thank goodness, for our ad sales team. But it really is a critical question, because on one hand, we need to raise money, we need to keep the income coming. On the other hand, we need to keep storytelling alive in a not so frustrating way.
I think it has been maximized, and that's the problem. When you see now the ubiquity of online sports betting, I read a statistic this morning that 50% of every 19 to 59-year-old person has a sports bet app on their phone. If we take a look at what's happened with some of the cheating scandals, that's being driven because there is so much money that is infused of sports and the system. when you take a look at the challenges that you have from a demographic of young males, where you have an extremely high degree of problem gambling, addictive gambling, that's the end result of having so much money in the system. And so I think this, after the 2018 decision, the leagues rush into the becoming owners of the sports betting companies. And I can promise you one thing, the sports betting companies are doing fine. And they're doing fine because they write the rules. Fortunately, they're regulated by state regulators to a certain extent, but not every state regulatory body has the skill, like a state like Nevada or New Jersey, to regulate the activity. And so I think there should be a different question posed. What can we do to change this dynamic? Keep in mind, before 2018, the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball never would have allowed a game to take place in Las Vegas, Nevada. Why? Because they didn't want to have the association with gambling, because they were worried about the integrity of the sport. We fast forward 8 years. Now we almost have the Sacramento A's become the Las Vegas A's. We have the Las Vegas Raiders. We have the Golden Knights. We have sports teams that are in Las Vegas. We have the Super Bowl in Las Vegas, which was unheard of a decade ago. So my focus isn't on how do we get more money into it. My focus in it is how can we implement regulations to protect the players, to protect the sport, and to protect the people who are betting.
I think you anticipated my next question for you, Professor Treychuk. And Mr. Steinberg touched on this as well about, the integrity of the game. And I want to ask you, what, if any, are there legal safeguards that exist to protect the integrity of sporting events? And then I want to come back to you, Betul, about something that Mr. Brand mentioned about how his son watches the game and he's focused on, I need this many points for my parlay to hit, So I want to ask you, how does fan data and audience analytics then come in from that sports integrity side and shape the programming decision that you have to make, and the advertising strategy? So, Professor Treychuk, if you want to start, and then I want to hear Betul's take on it.
In this environment, the only way to ensure integrity in the games, integrity in the sport, is through state regulation. I know this is in flux today with the prediction markets, but historically, and the Supreme Court has said time and again that gambling is specifically within the police powers of the states. The only entity that has the ability to ensure integrity in the gambling side of sports would be a state regulator. The problem you have is now you have 36 states that have legalized sports betting. Nevada, who's had legalized sports betting since 1949, has a very sophisticated regulatory scheme, and they have the agents that are able to make sure that both on the online side and on the land-based sports betting houses in the various casino resorts, that they follow the regulations that protect the player, the bettor, that protect the sport and maintain the integrity. The problem is it took Nevada a long time to develop this regulatory and statutory structure and to build up the expertise of the regulators themselves. So the states that thought, well, this is a bonanza, we'll go ahead and legalize this because we'll start minting money, they don't have that structure. And so that's the challenge that we have. There's no chance, in my opinion, certainly not this current government, that the federal government has the wherewithal to regulate the sports betting or the gambling industry. So to answer your question directly, it's up to the states, it's up to their regulatory bodies, and it's up to the state legislatures. And I know that's not a very comforting statement when we look at some of our state legislatures, but that's the only hope. It won't be the leagues, and I can promise you DraftKings isn't going to be the one. It's going to be the state regulator.
I mean, whether you're a broadcaster or a producer, one is bound by the laws, right? And these are federal laws, and these are local laws, these are state laws, these are federal agency guidelines. So all of the above. When there is an integration, whether it's about, advertisement or gambling or betting, we literally have to go through all that checklist. Can we even broadcast this? Can we even put it in front of the audience? Now, linear or cable is more strict than other media, but it doesn't matter. It really is the same checklist still. It starts with what Professor is mentioning, trickles down all the way to fan engagement. And I have to go back to sports being one part of entertainment. Why do we watch sports, whether it's going to games live or in front of television or on our smartphones? It is to be entertained. For younger people, if it's following one person on the team so that they can, bet on the person's points, it is that form of entertainment. For me, I love watching NFL and, go Niners, but I would watch anything that's within NFL all day, every week, every weekend. For me, it's the league itself, the sport itself. It's still entertainment. And we have to follow the rules. And those rules are pretty rigorous. And when it gets murky, when it gets changing, I'm a lawyer. I advise on the lowest risk. This is how you do it, and the highest risk. And it's up to the company's executives to pick a path, right? For me, what's really important is to bring it back to what the broadcast and the production, all the revenue streams and all the expenses related to production, does it move the sport forward? Because we wouldn't want, say, NFL to disappear 10 years from today because the incoming generation has no interest in watching the NFL. Now replace it with flag football. It's recognized as an Olympic sport. It's going to happen in a couple of years in Los Angeles. How exciting is that? We want to improve on that. We want to bring, we being anyone in sports ecosystem. It's good for the sport itself. It's good for the fans, and it's good for the broadcasters and producers to keep that longevity going. And if it's, keeping the fans on two screens at one time, so be it, as long as it's within the bounds of law.
I want to follow up with Professor Treychuk on what types of regulations do you think that work in Nevada you could see other states adopting to good effectiveness or regulating this properly?
Well, one thing that I would highly recommend, and which all serious states have done, to simply adopt our regulations lock, stock, and barrel. And after New Jersey legalized gambling in 1976, that's exactly what they did. And we see that with some states as they look to Nevada because of their long history, and they'll look to the expertise they have both in terms of the agents, but also in terms of the regulations that govern these. I think the one thing that I would add that would change the dynamic here, which I at my age, I can say things that I advocate for, I guess, but that I would advocate for, just like we don't allow advertising for cigarettes, and just like we don't allow advertising for alcohol, except for with some limited examples. If we did away with the advertising, and we did away with the stimulating the demand for sports betting, like the constant pings on your phone, this is what's happening, place your bet now. If we did that, and we provided a regulated environment for those that want to play, but we're not spending so much in stimulating the demand, I think that would go a long way with trying to control what I see the problems with sports betting in the leagues. It's not even the leagues. Now you can bet on Little League. And so this is a way that we would have a chance of controlling it.
Betul, do you have any comments about the advertising piece of that proposed regulation?
I mean, I would say it from an international or global perspective. Is the brand value of a particular sport and a particular league, right? We heard about NFL international games, NBA international games. We're all watching the Olympics to a degree, Winter Olympics to a degree. So sports is really global, but laws are local. So if you want to take the world feed of an NFL production and really distribute in 200 countries, you will face 200 different legislations when it comes to advertising regulations. Some of the countries will not allow for some of the alcohol sponsors that are maybe the league's main sponsor. So how do you go about that? You cannot always put out a kosher product that's going to fit every single country's legislations. But you can guess more or less what's going to fly and what's not going to fly in the majority of the countries you want to distribute your product. So I think historical developments are pretty informative in terms of future, and the borders are blurring. It's not the same level of distribution globally today compared to 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Right now, we have access to things happening in Japan at the tip of our fingers. That wasn't the case when it comes to sports distribution 20, 25 years ago when I was just starting. So we have to be more conscious of perhaps the red lines if we want to reach to the widest possible audience when it comes to advertising and advertisement placement within the productions.
I'm going to ask one last question to you, Betul, before I open it up to Q&A for the audience. And this returns to a topic we talked about early with Jenny and Mr. Brand about the direct-to-consumer streaming platforms. I want to ask you, how do media companies balance that traditional cable kind of lifestyle and distribution with the growing demand for this direct-to-consumer on your phone streaming platform?
That's a good question. I think we hire younger people to tell us what to do so that we have a good strategy for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And we keep our not so young people, like myself, on as well, because I think what we want as audience is not to have the same thing that's on cable on our phone. That would be nice if we're consuming the live game. Sure, I would love to watch it on my phone too. But I think the more variety and the more content we get, the happier we are as audience. And I think it's also about the attention span too. On a regular Sunday, I catch my husband watching the live game on television, all the while scrolling Instagram and TikTok of Fox Sports or NFL just to see what's happening out there. simultaneously. So if you see the same thing on both television and on your social media, there is no need for two screens showing the same thing, is there? So I think media companies are trying to focus on platform-specific, medium-specific content creation, whether it's about a viral player, Jameis Winston, hired just for the week of Super Bowl in New Orleans last year, going around doing his thing, attending press conferences, creating content, short form, just for that weekend, or bringing powerhouses like Leslie Osborne, doing a digital specific program surrounding the Women's World Cup as a supplementary content to keep audience engaged before, during, and after the live game happens. So I think that's the strategy that we've been seeing in media companies to create more diversified content specific to different platforms.
And at this time, I'm going to open it up to the rest of the audience as well for Q&A.
Hi, this question is for Professor Trachok. So my understanding of platforms like Kalshi or Polymarket is that they advertise themselves not as gambling, but as short-term investments. We've discussed earlier how this needs to come from the states mostly, but because of that sort of investment spin on things, do you see an opportunity for the federal government to regulate these prediction markets at all?
Thanks, Nico. The federal government certainly has the constitutional authority to regulate those markets. What the federal government doesn't have the ability to do is to supplant the state regulatory schemes across the country, and that's what is happening today. But if you take a step back and it just asks the question, what is gambling? Every state in most countries around the world have three common elements for gambling. What constitutes gambling? You need a wager, you need chance, and you need a prize. And so states have either allowed and required licensure of gambling if you have an activity that meets those three requirements, or they preclude it absolutely. And the fight that we see going on now, in my opinion, and I think in any gaming lawyer's opinion, what these prediction markets are doing is gambling, not just in sports betting, but across the board. You have a wager, you have a chance, it's not a guaranteed outcome, or nobody would wager, and you have a prize at the end. And so that's the fight. And who wins that fight in the courts, because it won't be the Commodities Future Trading Commission, because we know where they're going. The president's son is on their board. We know where they're going. Do the state regulators prevail in court? And that's what we're litigating. That's what my firm's litigating right now on behalf of the Nevada Resort Association and the Nevada Gaming Commission. And I think that the courts side on the state's favor in this area, but it's the outcome of this, Nico, of this very basic fight is it gambling, and does the state have the authority, or did the Dodd-Frank law to protect consumers on swaps, did that somehow magically supplant the state statutory and regulatory schemes that have been in existence since the founding of the Republic? You can tell which way I think it's going.
I'm going to ask a question for both, which is right now there's big litigation, some of the biggest litigation around social media addiction. So we're seeing Meta going to trial around whether it's causing addiction. Will that have an effect, the outcome of that? Well, do you think that would have an effect on, let's say, either gambling addiction or even sort of the way broadcasting is relying on advertisement or doing short form media now?
Wow. We'll see. I don't know how it will impact the producers, because if you think about everyone having a camera can become a content creator, is a content creator. We take pictures of beautiful flowers, and yeah, we're now a creator of a content, and we distribute it on social media platforms. Can you stop that? I don't know. And if I'm a content creator with millions of followers and some, anti-bug spray company, pesticide company wants to get in touch with me, give me money so that I use their pesticide spray on a beautiful flower that I just captured, I don't know if, that can be stopped. And this is the purest, this is the most organic, this is the most individual way of content creating and distributing, and the relationship with the advertisers. It's a tough question.
I don't think so. I don't think it helps us that much. We've had suits in Nevada, other states, where somebody accuses and it's not the estate, it's the casino, where they accuse the casino of feeding their addiction. The only way and I don't think this is affected by what we see with social media, the social media litigation now. I think it all comes down to the state regulation. If a state, and the European states have been pretty good at this, but not here in the United States, if a state were to pass a statute and the regulations that require the casino operator or the online sports betting platform to provide certain forms of protection for compulsive gamblers that require stopping the action at a certain point when a certain amount has been lost. And if those rules aren't followed, then you would have the liability of the casino or the online platform to the customer, but it would be dependent on the violation of the regulation. But just offering the game itself, even though there's been dozens and dozens of lawsuits across the country over the years against the casino, those haven't been successful.
Well, please join me in thanking the speakers and giving them a round of applause. And I didn't really prepare any concluding remarks, but just want to say thank you to everyone who came today and supported this conference. And I hope you continue to keep in touch with the sports and entertainment law community. And yeah, thanks again for coming.